We are on the record for a special hearing for case number 29279, listed in the North Dakota Industrial Commission hearing docket for April 18th, 2022. I'm Stephen Nelson, hearing examiner for this hearing, and the time is 8:59 a.m. And as mentioned, this is case number 29279 in the matter of a hearing called on a motion of the Commission to consider amending current field rules and or impose a policy to establish a drill back policy for horizontal wells and such other relief as is appropriate. The Commission will accept and consider written comments on this motion if received no later than 5 p.m. CDT, April 18, 2022. Submit written comments to the Oil and Gas Division, 1016 East Calgary Avenue, Bismarck, ND 58503-5512, or brkadrmas@nd.gov. The Oil and Gas Division of the Department of Mineral Resources has scheduled this special hearing to collect evidence and testimony to address amending current field rules and to or establish a drill back policy for horizontal wells, such other relief as is appropriate. The Commission is seeking testimony on the following: effects on correlative rights of adjacent working interest and mineral interest owners, effect on section line, lease line wells, effects on heel to toe and heel to heel wells, effect on estimated ultimate recovery, effect of pool entry point, effect of ghost hole and sidetracked laterals on current and future development, proper cement isolation and evaluation. The purpose of this hearing is to get input from interested parties. This is not a question and answer session. This is not the time and place to pose questions to the members of the Commission staff. Limit your testimonies to the areas I just indicated, which are also indicated in the hearing notice. Following today's hearing, the Commission will consider the testimony and evidence received. The record will remain open until June 15th at 5 p.m. The Commission will then provide a proposed order, which will be made available for public comment. Another hearing will be scheduled for June 16th. The Commission will provide proper notice and hold that hearing to consider amending current field rules and or impose a policy to establish a drill back policy for horizontal wells based upon the proposed order. I will call parties to testify in the order in which you were signed in. If you wish to testify and have not yet signed in, please come forward at this time and sign in. If you are not prepared to proceed when I call your name, you'll be moved to the end of the list. Each person will be allowed 15 minutes of testimony. If during your testimony you are near the end of the 15 minutes, you will be informed of the remainder of time and asked to sum up your testimony. We request that parties do not repeat testimony of others. We will take a 15-minute morning break around 10:30 this morning. Depending on where we are at with the testimony from interested parties, we will take a 1-hour lunch break if necessary. If it appears that testimony will be concluded around the lunch hour, we may continue testimony through the lunch hour. We will not be accommodating any PowerPoint presentations, but you may pass out copies of your slides, and we will make that part of the record of this case. Individuals wishing to present oral testimony at the hearing were asked to sign up prior to the hearing. The Commission will call each of the individuals signed up in the order their request was received. The Commission is also allowing telephonic testimony today. All documents to be used during the telephonic testimony was to be submitted before 5 p.m. CDT, April 18, 2022. And again, there is a 15-minute limit on testimony. Parties will be asked not to repeat the testimony of others. If you do agree with the testimony that has been previously provided, instead of repeating it, please provide that you are in agreement with the previous testimony given. When I call your name, please come forward and sit by the microphone as this hearing is to be streamed live. You'll be sworn in. Please state your name, address, and the organization you are representing, if any. Following your testimony, the Commission staff will be given an opportunity to ask you questions regarding your testimony. I believe Lynn Helms has some comments he would like to make.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Thanks everyone who is here to appear in today's case and also provide telephonic testimony and potentially provide comments. One point I want to make is that the Commission staff intends to post a draft order as soon as possible after today's hearing so that you have something to work from if you want to submit follow-up comments. So that draft order will come out well in advance of June 15th so that there's timely comments. Maybe a little bit of background on what we're trying to accomplish. The statutory requirements for the agency are to, number one, prevent waste, and number two, or equal to number one, protect the correlative rights of all the owners. And what we've discovered is that the situation with off-site wells, off-site located wells and drill back wells sometimes creates a conflict between these two. So we're trying to resolve that in the most fair manner possible. A little information, there were 570 wells spud in 2021. More than 95% of those used a drill back. So it is a very significant technology development in terms of how technology works out in drilling wells in the Bakken and Three Forks. About 50% of those were either drilled from an off spacing unit location or drilled back outside the spacing unit that was to be produced by the well. So that means that they actually left the pooled spacing unit that they were to be completed in and then came back in or started outside that spacing unit and entered into that spacing unit. In 2021, we had 14 of what we call ghost holes. This would be off spacing unit wells or drill back outside the spacing unit wells that were unable to run casing and cement across the spacing unit boundary. Therefore, some portion of a well bore was left open connecting the two spacing units. That represents 5% of our off-unit or drill back off-the-unit wells, 2.5% of all the wells that were drilled in 2021. Just let that settle in for a minute. That means that one well out of 20 that started off the spacing unit or drilled off the spacing unit and then came back in left a ghost hole connecting the spacing units that could not be plugged. And so something had to be done in order to protect the correlative rights in those situations. Just a few examples. We had a diverse working interest and mineral interest well. The operator drilled from their spacing unit, back drilled into another operator's spacing unit, all the way to the casing point in the Middle Bakken Formation. They lost the well bore, that well bore at the base of the surface casing, leaving a ghost hole all the way from surface casing into the Middle Bakken. They had to come back and re-enter that well, or they chose to come back and re-enter that well. They were able to properly plug from the lodge pole to the surface, but an open hole remains from the lodge pole, about 270 feet within the other operator's spacing unit, to the Middle Bakken, about 330 feet into the approved spacing unit for that well. Another one was an off-site surface location, diverse working interests and mineral owners. The operator drilled from another operator's spacing unit to the casing point within the Middle Bakken in their own spacing unit. They lost the drill string and sidetracked. So they left a ghost hole, an open hole, from the lodge pole into the Middle Bakken. The ghost hole remains there, about 225 feet within the other operator's spacing unit to 138 feet within their own spacing unit. We are seeing a number of issues develop that are creating additional issues with this drilling situation. So one of those is overpressure in the Indian Kara. That's forcing operators to use new well designs. There's a 4-string design that they're using, and in some cases they're actually experiencing problems with the Greenhorn Shale and the Indian Kara being overpressured, forcing them into 5 casing string design for the wells. In order to work around that, there are proposals before the Commission for monobore wells. One style of that well would set surface casing into the Pier Shale, then set intermediate casing below the Indian Kara, and then drill all the way from the Indian Kara to TD. In a drill back situation or an off spacing unit location, those present significantly higher risk for the protection of correlative rights. Another monobore design with problems in the Greenhorn would require surface casing into the Pier Shale, intermediate casing through the Greenhorn, intermediate casing below the Indian Kara, and then a wellbore all the way from the Indian Kara to TD, traversing across that spacing unit boundary. So what are the impacts of 1 out of 20 of these wells going bad? Section line wells require significant collision avoidance, reduction of completion intervals, and in some cases complete elimination of the section line wells. They also, as a result of these type of ghost holes crossing spacing unit boundaries, we end up with restricted completion intervals of all additional wells in the quarter sections on both sides of the spacing unit boundary, as much as 600 feet reduction in completion interval for the operator that created the ghost hole and the operator that they impacted. This also means that prior approval and post-frac reporting is going to be required within those quarter sections. So there are significant impacts that result, and as we've seen this technology develop and become part of 95% of the well bores drilled last year, and 50% actually leave the spacing unit or start outside the spacing unit, we're seeing, like I said, 1 out of 20 create some type of impacts to the operator and to their neighbor. So the purpose of our hearing today and the comment period and the follow-up hearing is to find out from you how wells could be designed to minimize waste and protect the correlative rights of all of the owners in these diverse ownership situations. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that Lynn's talking about off-site locations also, and the ad that we put out there, the notice, was for drill backs. But really, we have the same issues with some off-site spacing units or surface locations drilling into their spacing unit. So we may actually decide to also have another case docketed on our June 16th docket that would address that. But we want comments on both types.
Okay. And with that, I guess we will move on to our first witness, Will Hauser. Mr. Hauser, please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
Please provide your name, address, and organization you represent, and then you may begin your testimony.
My name is William Hauser. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs for Continental Resources Incorporated. Address is 20 North Broadway, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, 73102. Good. Continental appreciates the opportunity to comment on the motion today regarding the drill back process. It's a very important issue to us, as you can imagine. I'm accompanied today by Scott Donnelly, our VP of Northern Region Production, Jen Kaiser, our lead counsel for the Williston Basin, Caleb Sharp, the manager for resource development, Abe McKellen, the staff engineer for Bakken Resource Development, and TJ Beauchelet, land supervisor for the Bakken and Powder River Basin. For the record, as most of you know, or some of you probably know, Continental is based in Oklahoma City. And we are the largest leaseholder and the largest producer here in the nation's premier oil field, the Bakken. The company also has significant positions in the Scoop and Stack plays of the Anadarko Basin of Oklahoma and positions in the Powder River of Wyoming and the Permian Basin of Texas. Continental is a top 10 independent oil producer in the U.S., and with a focus on the exploration and production of oil, Continental has unlocked the technology and resources vital to American energy independence and our nation's leadership in the world oil market. This year, the company celebrates 55 years of operations, and just lay that out to, you know, a little bit of our experience and the ability we have to address this issue. We wish to reserve detailed technical comment for the policy proposed today, and we appreciate the comments that Lynn laid out on what we're really dealing with going forward here. We do recognize that with the innovative nature of exploration and production technology, that the oil and gas industry is in a constant state of change, and as such, the NDIC must have the flexibility required to implement regulations to address these issues as they arise. Continental stresses, though, that the continued ability to drill back is imperative to our Bakken operations, and we believe that with the proper planning, the current regulatory regime protects against the possible negative consequences associated with the drilling technique. Continental is confident that the NDIC will practice extreme caution and be cognizant of the undesirable effects which could result from overregulation of the drillback procedure. We're certain that the NDIC will take the time to listen to the public and industry comment on this matter and issue guidance, if any is determined to be needed, in a manner which will be consistent with the NDIC's declared public interest to prevent waste, to avoid the drilling of unnecessary wells, and to fully protect the correlative rights of all owners. Continental looks forward to sharing its knowledge on this issue, working with industry, the public, and the NDIC towards a successful conclusion to this matter. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be heard, for measured consideration of all the testimony and comments that will be presented to you on this matter going forward. Like I say, we don't really have a lot of technical testimony today, but we will be preparing that for the future hearings.
And are there any questions from commission staff?
Will, do you know what kind of scenarios Continental plans to model or present to the commission? For example, we're contemplating a number of different scenarios where the operator would not be allowed to enter the Bakken pool until they were back inside their own spacing unit, or perhaps not enter the Bakken pool until they reach the setback. What would the impacts of that be on the completion interval, say for a Middle Bakken well or a Three Forks well? Those are the kinds of technical information we're looking for. So there's at least three scenarios contemplated. One is no change, just go ahead and continue without any limitations. One would be you don't enter the Bakken pool until you are back inside your own spacing unit or reach your own spacing unit. Another would be you don't enter the Bakken pool until you reach the setback, which we set some 10 years ago or whatever, we adjusted those setbacks. So we're wanting to look at what would the impacts of various scenarios look like on completion interval and estimated ultimate recovery. This
is Abe McKellen. He's a staff engineer.
Thank you, sir.
With Continental, member of our technical team that joined us up here today. And while I could give you general, answer to that question, I think Abe's better suited to give you what you're looking for there.
Swear him in.
I believe Abe is signed up next for the testimony.
Oh, he signed
as
up
well.
next. Great.
So I guess, why don't, Mr. McKellen, I'm going to just swear you in and have you comment. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
Okay. Please provide your name, address, and organization you represent. Go ahead.
Abe McClellan, Staff Resource Development Engineer for Continental Resources, Inc. Address 20 North Broadway, Oklahoma City, 73102.
And should we just have him go ahead with his testimony and then question?
Please.
Comments to address those specific concerns. We will have written technical documentation that will provide solutions to entering the Bakken pool for that proper entry point into the spacing unit, but also have sensitivities to optimize the completable lateral footage to ensure maximum recovery in those spacing units. Mm-hmm. Such designs will not only benefit current well designs, but also all well designs, including the monobore.
Abe, we had intend to have a draft order that we would place out there for comment, and it's very important for us to have comments before we do the draft order.
Yes, sir.
And what we would like for all companies to do is provide that as soon as possible and not wait until the draft order comes out.
Correct.
So we can have a better understanding of what is wanted and needed out there. And then we can incorporate that into the draft order, and then you can comment again on the draft order.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Perfect.
Abe, I kind of laid out three scenarios that we've contemplated. Has Continental Resources looked at additional scenarios for pool entry and well bore, landing the well bore and completions? Or is it pretty much come down to those three?
Specifically for the setback or in offsite, drilling of offsite units?
Correct.
Yes, we've looked into that, and we look forward to, I guess, providing more technical documentation prior to the hearing, but we will running current well designs for the Bakken entry in our specific operated unit. So
Okay.
that provides the maximum lateral footage at landing point within our hard lines. So it's going to be the well design is going to be a compromise from the Bakken entry to landing point, I should say, based on our curvature of the well design.
Abe, will your technical comments include the impacts of the scenarios that Lynn laid out and what an impact they would be on reserves? And
Yes, sir.
okay, thank you.
And do we have any further questions from commission staff? And did you have anything further? I know we kind of went a little out of order there, so.
Well, sorry about that. We weren't really sure what we were dealing with when we got here. And in the notice, while broad enough to cover all the topics, we weren't really sure until you gave your comments this morning what we really need to be focused on. So we'll be involved in helping get this issue solved and provide everything we can to help you do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And next on the list, we have Paul Lamke. Mr. Lemke, do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
Give your name, address, and organization you represent, and go ahead.
Absolutely. Paul Limke. I'm a senior drilling engineer for Oventive. It's 4 Waterway Place, the Woodlands, Texas 77380. I guess before I start, I'd like to echo what Continental brought up. A lot of that will be echoing what Continental brought up, but I definitely appreciate the time and the opportunity to come before you guys and comment on this. Obviously, this rule is going to have far-reaching implications on future developments, so we definitely want to make sure that you guys understand that, especially what Lynn said, we definitely want to work through this issue and make sure we come to a compromise between that makes everybody happy, right? We're all trying to develop these, the DSUs that we have out there to the best of our ability and make sure we're protecting everybody's rights. So we did submit a written testimony yesterday, and so that's really kind of where we're going to sit right now for the time being. And then I think we would echo what Continental said earlier as far as, and what you all mentioned, just focusing on not wasting, the resource that we have, making sure we maximize all acreage that we have.
Are there any questions from commission staff?
Go ahead.
Paul, the letter that was submitted by Oventive doesn't really get into a lot of the nuts and bolts of what the impacts are and stuff. Do you also plan to submit timely comments to kind of, I guess, extrapolate that and address some of the other issues?
Yeah, Bruce, thanks for the question. No, absolutely. I mean, I think really what we were trying to get from this meeting up here was to try to understand the exact, what NDIC was after with this hearing. And now that we have a better understanding, we'll work and make sure we provide the technical documentation to help guide this conversation going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, your letter discusses other states where Oventive has operations. are you aware of other states addressing this issue and how they have addressed it, either through regulation or permitting stipulations or whatever you're aware of? If you could tell us what those other states are and indicate whether you can provide for us how they've addressed it.
Yeah, Lynn, no, also another good question. At this time, I personally cannot, but I can tell you that everybody, at the company is working to gather the information from other regulatory bodies in Utah and Oklahoma and Texas, where we also operate and have run into, similar issues that we're going to be discussing here. And we'll be happy to provide that and, plan on using that as some of the testimony, some of the technical documentation to discuss.
Okay, thank you. And we'd be interested in whether if they've issued an order, if you could point us to that or provide a copy. If they've issued a regulation, we'd like to see that. I know permit stipulations, permit information might be confidential, but you might be able to share permit stipulations that have been placed on a well or wells that address the issue as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We'll be happy to provide that.
One other question, does Ovintiv drill section line wells?
Yes, sir, we do.
Okay. And so have you had to address issues with ghost holes or drill back wells or off-site wells in drilling those section line wells?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
Okay. I was going to ask if you had, or if you would at least review with your department and provide that information as well as to what was required in terms of collision avoidance or reduced completion intervals or anything like that.
No, we'll make sure and do a thorough check of the wells that we've had in the past, and if any of those fit that description, we'll bring them to light.
Okay, thanks.
Paul, we did have an incident where Ovintiv went in and fracked a well. I believe it was a lease line well, and I forget the field now, but it was the two offset wells that was affected. One was a Madison well of Sampson's, the Peterson, and the other was MBI and LM number 2 well, I believe. And that was a Bakken well that they were trying to plug. So, as you know, you can affect wells quite some distance away when you have some problem well in between it. So, if you can learn and tell us anything that you've learned from that experience too, that might be helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Bruce. We'll also bring up in other areas what we've seen as well, as far as how far we've seen frac communications and stuff like that.
Okay, so, thank you.
Paul, I just want to clarify, you did state you were going to submit similar comments to what Continental had just testified on, but would you include, or does Ovintiv plan to include, any past history with ghost hole situations and how the Ovintiv worked through that as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from commission staff? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Appreciate it, guys.
That was the last on my list for people in the room. Does anyone else in the room want to testify on this matter? Seeing none, we do have some telephonic witnesses. First is Christopher Frazier, I think. Bethany will get on the line here.
Chris, this is Bethany with the NDIC. Are you ready for your testimony? All right, I will put you through. One moment.
Mr. Frazier, can you hear me?
I sure can. Hear me.
All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
With you.
All right, please provide your name, address, and the organization you represent, then go ahead and begin your testimony.
My name is Christopher Frazier. I am the Operations Engineering Manager for XTO Energy here in Williston, North Dakota. Address is 321 22nd Avenue East, Williston, North Dakota, 58801. All right. Concerning the effect on relative rights of adjacent working interests and mineral interest owners, building back into or through another interest mineral does not mean that those relative rights have been jeopardized or taken. Mechanical isolation via casing and cement exists. It's already depended on as a barrier to relative rights that fall shallower. As a specific example, current industry practice includes entering pool outside of the basement unit boundary, protecting all relative rights. Mechanical isolation. Concerning the effect on second line or leaf line well, the potential to block adjacent mineral owners access to mineral section or leaf line wells is very minimal risk, which risk can be completely mitigated through collaboration between adjacent operators. Only in the scenario where the leaf or section line wellbore perpendicular to the field side build back, and where the field side build backs are already in place, there's exposure exists for potential underexploitation of a lease line well. Collaboration between both working parties could lead to engineered solutions to avoid potential limitation on future well designs. Moreover, lease line wells are not always necessary or economic to optimize recovery. Concerning the effect on heel to toe, heel to heel. Heel to heel, heel to toe development of common practice. Effective engineering and collaboration between operators has allowed successful operation for years. Additional regulation not necessary. Concerning the effect on estimated ultimate recovery and DUR, a build back policy that regulates trajectory and or point of access to the block and pool will result in shorter completed laterals than we don't. Our initial estimate that it takes 2 to 3% shorter laterals does reduce the length of the lateral in the producing zone. Concerning effects on full entry point, any regulation that affects full entry point has the potential to reduce that lateral length. It will have the same impact as discussed regarding the ultimate recovery. And as to proper cement isolation and evaluation, due to modern completion techniques, proper cement isolation can be achieved regardless of well trajectory or entry point. Accordingly, no regulation needed. That is the sum of XTO copy.
I think you were cutting out a little bit there, but did you say that was the end of your testimony, Mr. Lamke? Or
Oh, I apologize.
Mr. Frazier?
That is correct. And if I need to go back and specify if I was cutting out at all, please let me know.
I think so. Well, I'll turn it over to commission staff for questions then, and see. Are there any questions from commission staff?
Christopher, this is Bruce Hicks. You're talking, several times you mentioned the fact that no additional regulation is necessary. Is that your overview of drillbacks themselves? You think that industry can handle it by collaboration and that the commission does not have to have any additional regulation?
That's correct.
Okay. What we've seen a number of issues that have arisen, and some of them are the problem of not getting 7-inch to casing point and not having the 4.5-inch liner properly cemented across the spacing unit line. And, you know, those are real issues that maybe operators would agree, yeah, that sounds like a great idea to have this plan, but when you have the misfortune of not getting casing to bottom and some other problems, then we've created correlative rights issues. So that's what we're trying to address. We actually have 2 cases on the docket, one tomorrow and one the next day, because of drillbacks like this, where they had cementing and issues of getting casing to bottom. So, you know, it's a real thing, and we're seeing more and more of these, especially in just the last couple of years. So, you know, we would appreciate any additional comments that you could make on this that would be helpful to make a decision. Thank you.
Christopher, Lynn Helms here. Does XCO plan to provide any scenarios or data in support of the comments that you provided to us here in the last few minutes?
Now that we have a clear understanding for your initial oration, it's definitely possible for us to assemble those specific 3 instances ahead of for the testimony.
Yeah, I think we would be hoping to get written testimony and exhibits and technical evaluation before and after we post our draft order. Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure.
Any further questions from commission staff? Seeing none. All right. Thank you, Mr. Fraser, for your testimony today. We will move on to the next witness, Jason Stengel.
Jason, this is Bethany of the NDIC. We're ready for your testimony if you're ready. One moment.
Mr. Stengel, might be pronounced that wrong.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? All right. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
I do.
Okay. Please provide your name, address, the organization you represent, and then you may begin your testimony.
I'm Jason Stengel. I'm a reservoir engineer for Petrohunt LLC. Our address is 2101 Cedar Springs Road, Suite 600, Dallas, Texas 75201. Okay, I provided some exhibits. Am I allowed to talk to those exhibits?
Yes, you may.
Okay, first exhibit, that's just a title. The second exhibit is where we'll start. First of all, Petrohunt believes the current regulations do adequately protect correlative rights and prevent waste. The presentation will discuss why that's the case and what would happen if you were to change the rules and how that might affect Petrohunt. To begin with, on page 2, the example well design. This is actually a well we are currently drilling, and this is the design for it, just to discuss what the issue is here. If you're looking at it, you have, just to describe what you're looking at, you've got a side view of the well, you've got to zoom in on the curve, and then you have a map view of the well design. The current setback rules are 150 feet. So the plan for Petrohunt is to land the 7-inch casing shoe just past the setback. The way we drill our curves, the curves take about 480 feet to build, which necessarily means we're back building just over 300 feet into the off unit in order to land our casing shoe just past the setback, in which this case is about 170 feet into our drilling spacing unit. What that necessarily means is we do have about 200 feet of the curve that enters the off unit lock and pool, and that's just a function of the curve. Just looking at the side view, you can see the surface location. As you drill down, you see the back build. Then, of course, you can see where the curve starts and where the shoe lands. Zooming in on the curve, you can see how that curve intersects the Bakken pool. And you can see that the curve necessarily, just the way the curve is designed, enters the Bakken pool in the off unit. And then, of course, on the map view, you can also see how, the surface hole, you back build, and then you drill the well. Just a general note, depending on your target zone, hole direction, and, the Bakken system thickness, the amount of off-unit Bakken pool penetration is going to range from 0 to 800 feet. And again, most of that's just a function of how the curve is designed. Going on to the next exhibit, and this is specifically a Petra Hunt experience. We are adequately protecting correlative rights. Our well design is to set and cement the 7-inch casing through the curve past the 150-foot setback. Since 2014, Petra Hunt has had 59 wells that have penetrated the off-unit Bakken pool, and that's either we back-built through it or we had an off-unit location where we entered it. And we've had 0 correlative rights issues. No sidetracks or ghost holes have occurred in the off-Bakken unit pool, and we've successfully set the 7-inch casing at the design depth. The next slide, exhibit, preventing waste. This is our Petra Hunt experience. Waste comes in 2 forms. You can either strand barrels or incur excess costs. What you're looking at on the right is 2 DSUs we drilled. This isn't that we operate. This is down in Little Knife area. You can see the 5 wells coming off the one pad, 3 to the north, 2 to the south. The green triangles are the 7-inch casing points, which are just past the 150-foot setback. We believe the current 150-foot setback prevents waste in both forms. The 150-foot setback leads to about a 300-foot corridor, which is just a little tighter than the tightest interwell spacing you'll see across the basin, and we think the unit wells will adequately drain the barrels along that section line area. So it prevents waste of both forms. We no longer have stranded barrels, and we no longer need to drill an extra well to drain those barrels. On to the next exhibit. The hypothetical impact from shifting the setback. If you look at the map on the right, that is a Petra Hunt development, those 4 DSUs we currently operate, or we drilled. This is in our Clear Creek area. These DSUs were drilled a while ago, and the setbacks were further than 150 foot. It's similar to the map before. You could see the surface holes. You could see the green triangles where the 7-inch setback was set. That heel toe corridor is huge. It was so large that we ended up drilling 2 lease line wells, but that's a separate discussion. But we needed to drill some sort of lease line well in order to effectively drain those barrels that were stranded. Just for reference, those 4 DSUs are 5120 acres. And as I get to these bullet points to the left, just for reference. So we think the current setback is adequate to drain the heel toe section line. If you start shifting the setback away from the section line, you begin to strand barrels. If you shift the setback too far, you're going to necessarily need to drill a section line well to get those barrels. The second bullet point, this is just a straight aerial calculation. Our modern developments assume we're going to drain the entire DSU with our well spacing and our frac designs. So if you start shifting wells away from the setback, that's barrels we won't be able to drain. So a 100-foot setback, every 100 feet you push the setback, you're going to strand about 1% of the barrels over that entire 5120 acre area. If you push the setback an additional 300 feet, or essentially expanding the corridor an extra 600 feet, 300 on either side, you're leaving behind, 3% of the barrels. Well, depending on your well spacing, if you look at our map, we've got about 29, 30 wells in there. Depending on your well spacing, an individual well drains between 3 and 7% of that entire 5120 acre unit. So if you push the setback 300 feet, you're going to have to drill a section line well. On to the next exhibit. So here's a what if. And before we get to the what if, I'll just describe what you see on the right. On the right is a log of our East Tioga area. That is the area where I showed you that well design of the well we're actually drilling. I want to highlight in the East Tioga area, it's a very thick area of the Bakken system. So the top of the Bakken pool to, say, a horizontal Three Forks target is roughly 215 feet. So the question is, okay, what if we could not enter the Bakken pool off unit? Well, that would disproportionately hurt areas of the basin where the Bakken pool is thicker, most specifically the Three Forks. As I mentioned before, the curve is the curve. There's not much we can do to change that right now. So if you start shifting where you can enter the Bakken pool, the thicker you are in the Bakken system, the more you're functionally shifting your 7-inch point, which is the equivalent of changing your setback. So I have on there, at least in this particular area where we're targeting Three Forks in the East Tioga area, it'd be the equivalent of shifting our setback 200 to 300 feet. And so you either strand 2 to 3% of the oil, or you're forced to drill a section line well. The next exhibit. This is tying back to that well design. This is all the same well that we're looking at. This is our East Tioga area. This is specifically a zoom in on the wells we're drilling. The blue line, what you see is the circles are the surface holes. The blue line is the ETSB, that's the well design I showed previously. The green line is the Jorgensen. It's just an example of another Three Forks well that we're drilling right there. And these are wells we've actually currently drilling. The black line is the section line. The red lines are the 150-foot setbacks. And again, to highlight what, the curve and where you enter the Bakken pool, following the blue line, you have your surface. This is the ETSB well. You're back building off unit, then you start your curve, and the curve intercepts the Bakken pool about 200 feet off the unit, 200 plus feet off unit. It intercepts the Bakken shale a little closer. You intercept the Three Forks on unit, ultimately so you can land your casing shoe in the legal location past the 150-foot setback. The same thing for the Jorgensen well, except the exact opposite, heading south. You build back off unit. The curve forces you to enter the Bakken pool, 200 feet off or so, enter the Bakken shale, enter the Three Forks, and ultimately setting your casing shoe in the legal location. That's what we're currently doing, and that's just the function of the design. On to the next exhibit. If you were to, again, back to that hypothetical, you're not allowed to intercept the Bakken pool until you enter your spacing unit. This would have the effect of shifting our 7-inch casing point 225 plus feet. It's the same map as before, except the dotted lines show where the hypothetical wellbore would go. And it shows where, the curve would start. It starts slightly off unit. So you'd enter the Bakken pool at the section line, and then, of course, you'd ultimately intercept the Bakken shale, the Three Forks, and finally landing your 7-inch casing point about 225 feet further than you otherwise would have. And it would happen, both directions, obviously. So on to the last exhibit. What kind of, what's the economics of, say, drilling just the extra 200 to 300 feet versus drilling a section line well? And this is a large part of where, additional waste will come from. Keeping the current setback and saying, you know, okay, if you were to shift, if the setbacks ended up shifting, or the rules changed where you had to shift your casing point by 250 feet, you know, what's the marginal cost of 250 feet, keeping the current 150-foot setback? Well, I did it on 200-foot increments, even though the math is for 250 feet, and 200 foot is about one frac stage for us, so that's a nice chunk to do the math on. Well, one marginal 200-foot of wellbore for us is $87,000. Depending on your area, where you have 16 to 30 unit wells, if you think back to the slide of our Clear Creek area where there's 4 DSUs, you got 30 unit wells on the 5120 area. Or 16 wells in the less dense area. So 250 feet at a marginal cost of $87,000 per 200 foot times 16 wells is $1.74 million. Times 30 wells is $3.26 million. So being able to drill that extra 250 feet with the current setback rules, as opposed to maybe having to shift it for whatever reason, is between, you know, $1.7 and $3.5 million. If you shifted the setbacks to the point of needing an additional section line well, you're spending $9.6 million to drill that well, which is an unfortunate number because everybody's AFEs just went up. But the calculable waste is if you shift the setbacks far enough, you're going to have to spend an additional $6 million over and above what you would have spent had you been able to drill longer wells with the current rules. So that is my exhibits. We think the current rules adequately protect correlative rights and prevent waste. I'm open for questions.
Are there any questions from commission staff?
Jason, this is David Tabor. A couple of different questions. First off, does Petro Hunt plan to submit any additional technical information?
We will plan information as necessary, depending on what y'all come out with.
Okay. Does Petro Hunt normally do their drill backs when they own or are the operator of the spacing unit that they're drilling back into?
I can't answer that. I believe we get all the permissions necessary before we do it. So we don't always own the unit that we drill back into.
Okay. And one of your exhibits or pages that you provided here, you indicate that Petro Hunt has not had any issues with setting 7-inch to the approved design depth. Is it Petro Hunt's thought or eternal policy that if a different operator were to have a situation that impacted Petro Hunt's ability to complete their well, that you would work with that operator instead of us setting any form of policy?
Yeah, we would try to work with any and all operators with any and all issues to make sure it's fair for us.
Okay, thank you.
Jason, you testified that Petro Hunt hadn't encountered any issues with a ghost hole or one of these type scenarios that we're discussing today, but have you evaluated what the effect of a failure to cement a well bore across the spacing unit boundary might cause, and the restrictions that might be imposed if one of these ghost hole unisolated well bores was left across the spacing unit boundary, how many wells it might affect, and what the economic impact might be to both spacing units?
No, we have not.
Is that something you could do and provide as supplemental with your additional testimony?
We could. If we think it's necessary, we'll do some analysis.
I think it would be something that might help in evaluating the effect in this case. So if you could include something along those lines.
Jason, this is Bruce Hicks. Looking at your hypothetical impact from shifting the setback, the scenario you have here that you've outlined does not show that there were any drill backs across the spacing unit on these 4 spacing units, correct? Where the lease line well was drilled.
Are you talking about the lease lines themselves or the original 4 units?
Yeah. Well, I'm just observing that the lease line well that has been drilled here, and it appears there's 2 of them, that the offsetting adjacent north-south wells that are perpendicular to the lease line wells, it doesn't appear that any of these have drill backs that crossed across their own spacing unit.
That's correct. I was highlighting that the old setbacks were so far off, the corridor was so huge that we indeed have to drill a lease line well.
Okay.
And if you start pushing the setbacks too far, you're going to force operators to either strand barrels or drill an additional lease line well like we did in this particular area.
Okay, and what we've observed in the past is there's a myriad of ways these wells have been drilled. Of course, we had some operators that went in and initially drilled, maybe 4 wells on their spacing unit. They came back, drilled additional wells. Maybe they targeted the Three Forks versus the Middle Bakken, and then they started doing drill backs. So we could have a number of these where it would be advantageous to drill a lease line well, but you would also have the obstacle of drilling across the drill back wells, because you also had infills on the stand-up 1280s that did indeed have drill backs that crossed their own spacing unit. And in a scenario like that, how many frac stages would be deleted or not fracked going across a drill back such as that? If you were perpendicular to those drill backs, are you staying back 300 feet or 500 feet, or how far would you stay away?
I can't answer that at the moment.
And then also, if the drill back was in your target, you would have to go above it or below it, right? Which may cause you to lose additional reserves. So if you could quantitate that in some fashion or address it, we would appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any further questions from staff? Seeing none? Thank you for your testimony today, Mr. Stangold.
Thank you.
And that was our last witness on the list. So I guess that we'll be closing out today. As mentioned previously, the record will remain open until June 15th at 5 p.m. for additional comments, and another hearing will be set for June 16th.
So I think we received written comments from Devon and also from ConocoPhillips. We want to make sure those get in the record. Beg pardon? Right, okay, so 2 of them appeared and entered their testimony, 2 did not, so we want to make sure that those get in the record. And also encourage them to go back and listen to what's been presented by others today and what we presented as a commission, and follow up with additional comments.
Thanks. And anything further? Nothing. That will conclude our special hearing today. Thank you very much.